So if people go on to www.menti.com, and if you type in the code on the screen there, it's 66460853. And the question is just which option best describes your work. So there's options just along the bottom there, if you can fill that in. So again, that's www.menti.com. Brilliant. Okay, so roads and planning, environmental as well, biodiversity, climate action, and then other. If anyone who is from other wants to even put in the chat room which department that actually would be, it's just good for us to have an idea of who we have. So that's great. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing. Thanks a million, Iseult, and I'll start sharing again. Brilliant. So again, it's just nice to know who we have with us. So quick introduction. I'm Emer and I'm with Natural Capital Ireland, and we were brought on board by the CARO to deliver workshops on nature-based solutions. We had our introductory workshop, which was a broad introduction to nature-based solutions, and that was on the 13th of April. And I'm aware there's people here today that weren't at the introductory workshop. So if you do have a chance, do check out the recording. Sharon from the CARO is putting it up on the CARO website. So it's definitely worth it to have a look to get a good kind of broad idea of nature-based solutions. Today, we're going to be looking at Galway City's climate adaptation strategy, and we're going to be looking at it in relation to nature-based solutions. So just before we get into that, a quick recap on nature-based solutions. So these are solutions that are inspired and supported by nature. They're cost effective and simultaneously provide environmental, social, and economic benefits and help build resilience. And these solutions bring more and more diverse nature and natural features and processes into our cities, our landscapes and seascapes. And this is through locally adapted, resource efficient and systemic interventions. And nature-based solutions must therefore benefit biodiversity and support the delivery of a range of ecosystem services. So the key with nature-based solutions is that there's a co-benefit between humans and nature. So in terms of Galway City, very high recreational amenity value and ecological value. You've the Natura 2000 sites with the Loch Carib SAC and the Galway Bay Complex SAC. You're highly dependent on the landscape and the coast, and coastal erosion is a huge concern due to sea level rise and increase in storm surges. In relation to your strategy, so each of the local authorities published a climate adaptation strategy in 2019, and it's a 5-year plan for climate adaptation. Within these strategies, you outline risks, challenges, and opportunities associated with climate change. And also you outline the goals, objectives, and actions in relation to dealing with this. And throughout the document, there is a commitment to work with nature in order to adapt to climate change. So each of the strategies is set out basically with the same structure. So to engage, then plan and adapt. And within that, you have set out operational themes, and under each theme, different departments are. So you have water resources and flood risk management, you've governance, natural and cultural capital, community services, and critical buildings and infrastructure. So you've looked at different risks and opportunities associated with each operational theme, but I'm just highlighting a few of the risks that were highlighted. So particular risk to the coastal zone of Galway City, river and surface flooding was highlighted as well. Also, in relation to biodiversity, you've extensive peatlands on the western edge of the city, and also the risk to your coastal habitats. There's also the risk to water quality, water services and water quality, and also air quality. And you also highlighted the issues with flood management and with the impacts that could affect community and business support services, and of course tourism, which is hugely important down in Galway City. So some of the big vulnerability areas, and this is across the board with all the other local authorities as well, flooding is a huge issue. So the main flooding risks you had highlighted were coastal, river, local intense rainfall, and surface flooding. And you'd highlighted the fact that significant losses in infrastructure services and property damage have occurred due to severe weather events. In terms of the coastal areas, you've significant infrastructure and properties in the coastal areas and the sections of the River CARO. These areas are exposed to coastal flooding and erosion. There's also erosion of coastal habitats, and the coastal areas are already stressed by human activity, sea level rise, and storm surges. And there's also that additional pressure on the freshwater wetlands in coastal areas due to saltwater inundation. You highlighted as well risks to biodiversity. So I mentioned the peatlands there. They're quite extensive peatlands on the western edge of the city. And you have internationally rare lowland bog, blanket bog, and wet heath. And these we know there'll be a significant impact on from climate change. And you've noted in your strategy that careful management is required to prevent them becoming carbon sources. So we need to remain as carbon sinks. And you also highlighted the fact that climate change will make meeting existing conservation objectives increasingly challenging. So there is a good lot to think about. I'm just going to quickly go through some of the case studies. So in your strategy, you had outlined different case studies in relation to the different areas of concern. So flooding, high temperatures, storms, sea level rise and coastal erosion, and also low temperatures. So I'm just going to show a couple of pictures, and pictures are always worth 1,000 words. So this was from a really bad flooding event in the winter of 2009, and you can see the impact on the infrastructure. You see all the vehicles there. That would have had a massive impact there that winter. You also have the winter flooding as well, 2013-14, where there was widespread damage and flooding all along Galway City's coastline. And again, this is a huge impact on the environment, on nature, and of course, on the people that live there. It's huge, huge impact. So with all of these events, there's really significant impact. So in terms of us on people, homes and communities are impacted, health and well-being, businesses, tourism as well, agriculture in particular with that kind of flooding, pollution, the impact on infrastructure and also on buildings, and there'll be many more that could be added to that list. In terms of nature, biodiversity is hugely impacted, ecosystems are impacted, habitats can be lost or destroyed, species displaced, nesting sites destroyed, impacts on the landscape, impacts on the watercourses as well, and of course, coastal erosion. So we often think of the financial costs, but not the natural capital costs. So the value on our natural assets aren't often taken into account. We don't often acknowledge our dependency on nature, and we tend to be reactive instead of proactive. So dealing with the problem after the impact rather than getting things in place to reduce the impact before it arrives. So an investment in nature and nature-based solutions is hugely essential. So this helps build resilience. It's also a fraction of the cost of dealing with the aftermath of these severe events, like in the images I showed you. And a good investment in nature-based solutions is prudent risk management. So with the case studies and just thinking about your own locality and area, could nature-based solutions reduce the impact of such events? So before we go into looking at the actions that you had highlighted, I just want to ask the question, where do you see nature-based solutions being relevant in your locality or county? I'm going to stop sharing the screen and Iseult is going to share hers. So if you go back into www.menti.com, and the code is 664608 5-3. And this could be in relation to anything. It could be in relation to coastal erosion. It could be in relation to a particular beach, a particular part of the city, just anything that you think that nature-based solutions could be relevant for in terms of your communities and your own locality. So this will be a word cloud. So it could also be in relation to anything to do with them. There we have the beaches of the Spanish Arch. Could be to do with biodiversity. There's so many different areas that you could think of in the county. Storm surge, urban heat. Eglinton Canal, a particular canal. And the rivers as well, and Galway Bay. Again, there's so many parts of the whole coastline there in Galway that is being impacted and has been impacted. Excellent, the storm surges there as well, and rivers. Air pollution as well on the golf courses. So yeah, I'd say there's a few golf courses along there. Okay, that's great. Well, it's just to get kind of thinking about different areas in relation to nature-based solutions. So Isolde, I'm going to start sharing my screen again. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Emil. So it's just that was just really getting you thinking about different areas in your locality. So just to move on quickly here, this is a bar chart from the annual progress report 2020 for all of the local authorities. And you can see yourselves there, Galway City, you have, I think, just over 40% of actions are ongoing, and a couple of percent of them are completed. So again, that's this was done for all of the different local authorities for the end of 2020. So just to look at some of the actions in relation to your climate adaptation strategy, I've just picked a few out from each theme. So in one of them, you had communication and stakeholder engagement in relation to the climate adaptation strategy. And something that's come across in all of our talks is the importance of communication and with the community as well. And you'd highlighted this in relation to public information events and public consultation. And also you'd an action in relation to capturing the cost of climate events. In relation to infrastructure, you had an action for developing an integrated coastal zone management plan for Galway City, and also to assess the potential impacts of climate change in terms of sea level rise, wave heights and storm surge on Galway City's coastal zone. And you mentioned this in relation to specific areas like critical infrastructure, beaches, habitat and coastal ecosystems, existing coastal protection structures, tourism and private property and legacy landfill sites. In relation to natural and cultural capital, you had actions in relation to developing and implementing awareness campaigns, and also a review and update of Galway City Biodiversity Action Plan 2014 to 2024. And also you did an action for supporting biodiversity through natural pollination and an enhancement and restoration of natural systems in terms of pollination and open spaces. And you also had an action in terms of a database on the impacts of on the natural environment, which is hugely important, and also to promote green infrastructure. In relation to water and flooding, some of the actions you had included capturing data on extreme events, which is hugely important, and you'd highlighted the importance of monitoring water quality before and after climate events. Also, a rollout of major and minor flood protection and flood proofing measures for Galway City. And you had an action on developing surface water management plans. Now, there was no mention of natural flood management in the strategy, and that's something that definitely would feed into all of these areas, in particular the water and flooding actions. In relation to the community services, you had the awareness raising campaigns and highlighted the need for internal training and community awareness. So again, really important. And you'd also highlighted an action for identifying fund streams for local climate action projects. And again, that's a really important one. And we've had that feedback in the other talks in relation to community groups. Funding is always a huge issue there. You also had an action in terms of supporting communities and the voluntary sector in developing and implementing climate adaptation projects at a local level. And again, this feeds into this working with and communicating with communities. So there are some of the actions that you highlighted, and with the word cloud, we had considered different nature-based solutions in the area. So really, today is about really thinking about and considering specific nature-based solutions, adaptations. You'd highlighted issues with fluvial flooding on the regional roads. You'd mentioned particular areas in the city from Wolfetown Bridge and William O'Brien Bridge. And you'd also mentioned the impact on all sectors in relation to storm surges and coastal storms. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our guest speakers, and they're going to talk to you today about nature-based solutions. So our first speaker that we have today is Caroline Creamer. She's the Director of International Centre of Local Regional Development and Research Fellow in the National Institute for Regional and Spatial Analysis. That's a mouthful there, Caroline, and she's with Maynooth University, and she's going to talk to us about environmental resilience with an emphasis on nature-based solutions. We also have Dr. Kevin Lynch, who's a coastal geomorphologist with NUI Galway, and he's going to talk to us about flooding and coastal erosion. And we've Dr. Tig McIntyre from Go Green Roots at Maynooth University, and he's going to talk to us about nature-based solutions for urban health and sustainability. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And Caroline, if you want to share your screen, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for coming today. And if you want to put up your slides now, that would be great.
Fantastic, Emer. Thank you very much. And is that sharing yet?
Not yet. Oh, let's see. It's coming up now. Yeah. So you just have to make it full screen.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be with you this morning. My talk is going to be centered on a piece of research that we have just finalized for NESCM, which we launched about 3 weeks ago now. And it's looking at long-term resilient and sustainable cities. It was a scoping paper, and for this talk in particular, I'll hone in on the environmental resilience pieces within that document. Just say then that the purpose of that research, which was undertaken by Maynooth University, was to explore the conditions required to enable cities across the island of Ireland to build resilience and to develop in a sustainable manner. And within that report, we included a number of case studies and vignettes, and primarily we focused on Belfast, on Bristol, and on Milan. And all three of those cities are part of the 100 Resilient Cities Network, which was established in 2013 by the Rockefeller Foundation to help cities build resilience, recognizing that diverse physical, social, and economic challenges facing cities in the 21st century are as a result of combined impact of accumulated stresses and sudden shocks. So today's presentation will have four elements to it and will take approximately 15 minutes. So to start off, to understand what resilience is, well, resilience is not a new concept. It's rooted in action, not just high-level principles, but it's not very well defined. And this has led to some criticism for its vagueness and malleability. But at the same time, it sees very traits that enable it to become a bridging concept between the challenges facing the natural world and the resulting policy responses. At a socio-ecological level, it understands that systems are constantly changing, albeit in a non-linear way, and that to be effective, highly complex and often clunky systems in operation across cities need to adapt. Since the 1960s, the term has been closely associated with systems change and the achievement of an equilibrium across a range of disciplines, whether that be from physical science to ecology, engineering, economic geography, disaster studies, environmental management, and indeed spatial planning. In the early 2000s, resilience became associated with a place's or indeed a sector's bounce back ability. And a decade on, the bounce back ability has been replaced with build back better, the principle of which is to use a shock event or a disaster to create more resilient nations and societies than before through the responses adapted. Fostering resilience in the face of such challenges has captured the attention of governments, policymakers, academia, investors alike, not least in response to the climate emergency. And COVID-19 has presented us with the lens to see this evolution at play, where the overriding message is that we don't just want to bounce back and return to normal, but rather that we want to take this global disaster to press pause, rethink what we are doing and where we are doing it and how we are doing it, and to build back better, or indeed maybe build back different. For the purpose of our study, we took this definition of resilience that has been developed by Miro et al. In 2016. There are over 25 definitions of resilience, each very distinct. But for the purposes of our study, we picked this one because it speaks to the ability of an urban system and all its networks across temporal and spatial scales to bounce back, to adapt to change, and as required to transform its systems and processes that may limit current or future adaptive capacity. It speaks to the capacity of cities to survive and adapt, and recognizes that resilient cities need strong city leadership and good networks upon which resilience can be built in a holistic way that understands the dependencies that exist across city services, the potential vulnerabilities to stresses and shocks, and the resulting cascading effect. In terms of looking at then globally, as urbanization increases, the scale and predictability of risk becomes complex and unstable. Some, like flooding, are not new, but they're increasing in scale and intensity and frequency. Other shocks, such as disease pandemics, are posing new challenges. This has led to a proliferation of frameworks, programs, and networks being established over the last 10 to 15 years. All speak to the importance of pursuing sustainable development or addressing climate and environmental challenges and making the transition just and inclusive for all. And most of these networks engage with local government, so they're very useful resources. And they speak particularly to the seminal role of action at the local level in building resilience. As picking up on the role of action at the local level in progressing a resilience agenda, the new Leipzig Charter, adopted in November 2020, speaks to the transformative power of cities for the common good. The Charter is a key policy framework for sustainable urban development, to which Ireland is a signatory. It emphasises the flexibility needed within cities and their urban systems to respond to disruptive events and chronic stresses, while learning from past events and each other. The resulting transformations it contends should be based on the integration of social, ecological, and economic dimensions of sustainable development through the just city, the green city, and the productive city. So looking at resilience in action, well, drawing on core themes emanating from the Global Resilience Agenda, we looked at Ireland through 3 resilient policy agendas, namely climate resilience, socioeconomic resilience, and environmental resilience. They're all interrelated, so you can't speak about one without speaking about the 3. The resilience debate has in many respects been driven by the climate emergency. It recognises that planning for climate resilience is non-linear, that adapting to climate change will have an effect on the future resilience of jobs and enterprise and will shape society, that it has implications for where development happens, including transport infrastructures, the role of carbon capture, renewable energies, water supply, environmental management, and food security, and many other elements. This requires a place-based approach, building on local knowledge, and thus there is a growing role for local government in specifying these context-specific measures required that will lead to the transitions demanded. But of course, as noted by Rotterdam and their resilience strategy, resilience is more than climate adaptation. Socioeconomic resilience centres on the relationship between people and place, and this is strongly tested by both COVID-19 and Brexit. Recovery strategies are placing a strong emphasis on green recovery, embracing a better economy, better health and well-being, and a pathway to inclusion and just transition. Enterprise and planning policy in both jurisdictions across the island of Ireland place a very strong emphasis on transitioning to a low carbon economy, developing talent and producing jobs that are resilient into the future, where workers are adaptable with strong transversal skills. Resilience is also a strong theme in Ireland's rural strategy, which was published last month, with a strong emphasis on making rural living a viable option. And then turning to environmental resilience. And we have a nature in crisis. Nature is collapsing at an alarming and unprecedented rate. The resulting loss is systemic, structural, and interconnected, with the ecological disruption and underestimated security threat. Globally, we have lost 60% of our wild invertebrates and up to 76% of our insects since 1970. In Ireland, 2/3 of our birds are of conservation concern, and 1/3 of our bee species is threatened with extinction. Nature loss is impacting on climate change, but also on human health and quality of life. Nature-based solutions are spatial interventions that use the natural properties of our ecosystems to deliver multiple benefits. They are defined as living solutions that address societal challenges in a resource-efficient and adaptable manner, and to provide simultaneously economic, social, and environmental benefits. And they're a priority for member states across the EU. Examples include different forms of green and blue infrastructure, green roofs and walls, rain gardens, sustainable urban drainage systems, natural water retention measures, hedgerows, floodplains, and urban green spaces. So some of the examples of nature-based solutions that came out of our study for NESC. In Belfast, at the same time that the resilient team within the council were identifying its shocks and stresses, the Place-Based Climate Action Network, or PCAN, was established in Queen's University. A key output from this research partnership was the Mini Stern report, a net zero carbon roadmap for Belfast. This report estimated Belfast's total carbon budget, its current annual emissions, and from this concluded that it would use up its carbon budget in just over 9 years' time. A stark statistic that speaks to the urgency of the crisis we face, highlighting the importance of data and the information and insights this provides. And statistics like that really instilled then an urgency for action. In Milan, as the council commenced work on its spatial plan, Milan 2030, the resilient team were moved into the urban planning department. This gave the team the opportunity to examine the role and purpose of resilience in a plan under development, and provided a concrete mechanism under which to apply the concept to policy. In its final plan, Milan 2030, a key objective is a green, livable, and resilient city. This includes a new urban forest strategy, the reopening of the city's canal system, and the creation of 20 new parks. Through the input of the resilient team, the resulting spatial plan puts a very strong emphasis on sustainability, resilience, and quality of life, with the neighbourhood being the centre of change. In Bristol, as part of its One City plan, Bristol published its One City ecological strategy in September 2020. It commits to 30% of Bristol's land being managed for nature. an action dependent on collaboration of multiple partners across the city, recognising that other elements of the One City Plan call for development in housing and transport and energy, for example. This ecological strategy calls for all future development to deliver a net gain for nature through green buildings, green roofs, living walls, pollinator corridors, amenity spaces, and greener streets. It encourages more food growing within the city, recognising that this is a core role to play in helping to restore habitats across the city. It has a no-mow policy across its road verges. Work is already underway to improve the water quality in Bristol's rivers, waterways, and harbour. And as these natural systems are restored and litter and plastic pollutions tackled, the city's waterways are seen as a valuable, wildlife-rich natural corridor. Both Milan and Belfast resilience strategies include plans for urban afforestation, the planting of 3 million and 1 million trees and shrubs respectively by 2030. And there are many benefits to such green nature recovery corridors, from the absorption of CO2 to improved air quality to support and enhanced biodiversity. While not one of our key cities focused on, we did within the report also look to Derry and the really groundbreaking work that's happening there in terms of looking at green infrastructure, but also natural capital accounting. So within Derry City and Strabane District Council, they developed their first green infrastructure plan in 2019, and this had an associated action plan in place. This was the first such plan in Northern Ireland. And then in 2019, in association with Vivid Economics, the natural capital account was undertaken for all Derry City and Strabane District Councils green spaces, all 223 of them. And this identified that there are more than 5 million visits to Derry and Strabane recreational green spaces each year, and that these benefits provide low cost benefits to mental well-being and physical health improvements. For every £1 spent, it delivers £22 of benefits, with green spaces providing over £500 of benefit per resident in the city each year. So just bringing this all together then, in terms of lessons learned from the various case studies documented within the report, and in the interest of time, just honing in on two of these. Resilience is highly contextual. While cities and local authorities are addressing problems of a similar nature, each city is unique, and any solution must take into account local considerations. And resilient cities are living cities. COVID-19 has starkly illustrated the hollowing out of our urban cores that have taken place over decades and the resulting lack of vibrancy and people remaining. A city cannot be resilient without people at its beating heart. Resilient cities are living cities, places in which people not only work, but live and enjoy a high quality of life. This raises questions around what role urban design plays, what role for the architect, the landscape designer, the biodiversity officer. Resilience planning is often experimental. We need to experiment. And that planning of our green spaces should not be an afterthought, but should be front and center in all developments that take place within the city. The scoping paper identified 5 key principles for building resilient cities. And again, in the interest of time, just honing in on one of those, and that's the principle of subsidiarity. Building resilient cities requires a rebalancing of power, with cities having the autonomy to make strategic investment decisions that will serve the best interests of the city and region over the long term. Interviewees spoke of the need for cities to have a heart-to-heart conversation with citizens. The directly elected mayor elections in Limerick City and County later this year could be the game changer required in the rebalancing of power, and may prove to be an important laboratory in the design of citizen engagement model that will both unleash the potential of a place while ensuring a joined upness in the delivery of policies. As we investigated city resilience journeys, 2 core elements stood out to us as a necessary component of any city's journey. The first is the importance of collaboration. in delivering place-based impact and ensuring the longevity of any resilience pathway. Building resilience is not a one-person show. It is beyond the scope of any one agency. Taking Belfast again as an example, in addition to availing of the supports offered by the 100 Resilient Cities programme, they availed of other opportunities as they presented themselves. For example, the aforementioned PCAN network, which would lead to the Mini Stern report, as I've highlighted, but also the establishment of a Belfast Climate Commission, which rather than detract from the city's resilience journey, only served to strengthen it. And finally, the second standout was the governance arrangements put in place. While noting resilience is not a one person or one organisation show, it absolutely requires a dedicated resource. This is not an add-on to somebody's already full-time role. In addition, the creation of multi-agency oversight boards and a number of sub-boards in both Belfast and Bristol, which brought all the key city stakeholders together to oversee delivery, was integral to city-wide buy-in. And knowing that the actions required to build resilience are not without their pain points, this buy-in is essential. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that, Caroline. That was so interesting. And it was great to see the work that's going on in Belfast, Milan, Bristol and Derry. And again, the way you're highlighting this idea of a place-based approach to nature-based solutions, and to each city dealing, each place is different and has their own specific issues. So thanks a million for all of that. And I'd now like to introduce Dr. Kevin Lynch from NUIG. So Kevin, if you want to share your screen, you can fire ahead there. Thanks a million.
Okay. Share screen. You see that okay?
Yes, we can. It's perfect.
Thanks. So just first to say that myself and Caroline weren't talking before this. I just see her final point is nearly the same as my final point, so we'll see that a bit later on. My presentation really is about, it was developed just to maybe explain a bit about what's the science behind nature-based solutions on the coast. So I try and do that in a, quite a straightforward way and within 15 minutes. So I have some other bits and pieces in there, but that's essentially the core of what the talk is about. So Emer mentioned already and defined what nature-based solutions are. Really the core of them is this working with natural processes. And when all is said and done, you're looking at sustainable development because you're looking at the social, economic and environmental benefits. But when all is said and done, if there isn't some real component of increasing the value, the status of biodiversity and ecosystem services, then you're probably not talking about nature-based solutions. So that's a very important point to remember. I having a conversation with somebody last week and they were explaining something that was a nature-based solution according to them. And the simple question was, yeah, okay, well, where is the nature in it? Where is the biodiversity? Where are the habitats? So there has to be some component of that in there. And another point to make is that nature-based solutions aren't new. These are ideas that have been around for a while, and they're really an umbrella for ecosystem-based approaches. So as Caroline just mentioned, the climate emergency now has really brought it into focus again around nature-based solutions. But we've seen it before in things like ICZM and marine spatial planning and restoration over the years since the 60s and 70s, when it became clear that we can't survive on this planet without looking after nature. So just a good touchstone for if you want to read a bit more about it is this particular document that's just being published, and the website link is there as well, but it's the EU document on nature-based solutions. So that's just to start off with. So really what I'm talking about today is coastal ecosystems and coastal nature-based solutions. And the seminal paper on this was published in 2013. So, you know, we're talking nearly 10 years ago, and that was a point that led up to all the ideas being put together in one paper. So this paper from Nature from 2013 is where I've gotten some of these diagrams and that I'm going to explain. So there's really two kind of scenarios that I'm going to look at. One is this first one where you're talking about this top line here, where we're looking at conventional and ecosystem-based coastal defenses around an urban city where you have maybe wetlands in the past or whatever. And then the other one is a soft coast where you have dune systems, beach and dune systems. So I'll look at each of them in turn. So the first one here, this top left one, just to kind of explain, you know, what are the conventional approaches that have been used for the last, say, 50 years since World War II, when we kind of went off on this idea that we can control nature and we have all the solutions, and engineering and humans can come up with every solution to every problem we have. So what has happened in that time in terms of coastal flooding and coastal erosion is we've built up areas with large coastal defenses. So this is an aerial view of a sorry, this the other screen is blocking what I'm looking at. This is an aerial view of what a urban area might look like. So these pink parts are urban areas. Here's an urban area here, another one here, and maybe some suburbs in between. In order to protect against storm surge, coastal flooding, these lines here represent seawalls. So you have seawalls built up along here and in different areas to protect against the flooding. And some of the impacts of these are that because you're disconnecting the land, and in this case here, a wetland, from storm surges, in the bottom part here, you get degradation. So a wetland needs flooding to operate function as a wetland. And if that's cut off, then you're going to get wetland degradation here. In these areas up here, you have, because the area is protected and you have urban areas building up, you have greater water extraction from the surrounding areas. So you might get land subsidence. So the land is actually sinking. And if you think about sea level and sea level rise then, and relative sea level rise, if you have a sinking, a land mass that's sinking, that's just exacerbating the problem of sea level rise. So that's another effect of this. But the main effect that I wanted to show you here is the peak in the storm surge from an approaching storm. So if we add in here, so you're looking from above and you have a storm approaching here from the west, and you're looking at, these are the wave crests of the storm as it approaches. As it comes into this channel or this small bay, the storm crests here approach the bay, and as they move in along the channel becomes narrower as you move inland. And so what happens is the crest of the wave, the length of the wave gets confined more and more as you move in the channel. And you get to the point here where it's really well confined. And the result is that the water has to go somewhere, so it moves up. And so your storm surge level actually increases as you move in the channel, so that when you get to the urban area that you're trying to protect, not only do you have land subsidence over time, long periods of time, but you also have this increased storm surge that reaches the urban area. So it's actually quite counterproductive. You're trying to protect against flooding, but you're actually increasing the likelihood of it. And this is, in some cases, you will hear, oh, you know, this hasn't happened in our lifetime. We've never seen this. This is something that's unprecedented. Well, the reason for that oftentimes, and not just in this scenario, but right across the country, you hear it in rural areas as well. It's because the land surface and our land use has changed. The way in which the natural processes operate have changed over time. And so there's just no precedent for these events. Okay, so that's what happens to storm surge in this scenario. So if we look at it in, if we had an ecosystem-based coastal defense and went back to a more nature-based solution, we're looking at this top right-hand corner here. So what we have here is a restoration of, well, the first thing is you remove some of the coastal defenses, and this has been tried in many places around the world and has been shown to be effective. And here you have all the coastal defenses completely removed, and then you have some restoration of coastal wetlands or creation of coastal wetlands in these areas. So what happens then is if you have a storm surge, again, the same storm surge moving in here, and rather than it being confined to a channel, what actually happens is that the crest of the wave leaks out along the wave crest, and the wave moves into these areas of wetland and across the wetland. So the volume of water moving up the channel is reduced. So here's your storm surge at this point has been much reduced from what it was originally. And then you get all the way into this point at the city that you're trying to protect, and the storm surge is practically negligible at this point. So you have water also moving into the wetland areas and recharging the wetlands. And in some cases then, Caroline mentioned about urban areas, the same idea in urban areas where you create green areas here, and you're essentially slowing the flow. You're creating places that water can go that isn't urban areas or people's houses you're trying to protect. That's what happens in this sort of scenario. And of course, you need space for wetland creation or to restore former wetlands. It's not, you can just create them anywhere. Other things just to note in this particular scenario is the introduction of reefs here, and these are natural reefs. And the idea here is that you slow the speed of the wave as it crosses. You take the energy out of the wave. And then this would be very important for reducing things like coastal erosion. Coastal erosion is caused by the energy of the wave. So if you take the energy out, then you're reducing the likelihood of erosion. Sorry, I just wanted to show that this process here in a photograph. So this obviously isn't a wetland, but as the wave crests are coming past this point here, there's an area that the waves can leak in here. It's a harbor in this case, and you can see that they're elongating out here. And so by the time you get in here, the wave crests are a lot smaller. The wave energy is a lot smaller than it had been in here. Okay, so just to go back to this idea of introducing reefs. So the reefs themselves or the wetland, both of these can reduce the wave energy. And this is just a few pictures of what these look like. So here you have salt marshes. Here's a salt marsh in Mulranny. These are oyster trestles here. Here's a natural oyster reef, and any wetlands at all that that are natural to an area and can be restored can work. These are sea grasses here on the right-hand side. We have these out in Galway Bay along by Salt Hill, especially. I've seen them. And these are kelp forests. These are also really good at reducing wave energy. And here's some kelp that has been restored in plots, specifically as a nature-based solution. So just how does that happen? These are just a couple of more examples. These are mangroves. Obviously, these don't apply to Galway, but it's the same idea. You have wave height being reduced as it reaches the coast. These are seagrasses, and this is corals and coral reefs. So how does it work? So if you have a wave approaching from this direction here, this is an oyster bed, and this is a restored one. This is a badly degraded or eroded one. In some cases, they might be completely absent at this stage, taken out from either harvesting or over harvesting, or to create just to remove them so that you have channels for navigation for yachts and whatever else the case may be. So if you have a storm approaching from this direction, as the storm passes over this degraded or dead oyster bed. This is the wave energy here. So down at the further you go down in the water column, the less the energy. But you can see that the profile of energy across the water column doesn't change at all once it passes over this reef. And so what you have then is a lot of energy still approaching the coast here. The possibility is then that it can erode sediments along the coast and move those offshore. And you have your sea level, your water level here, right up against the building that you're trying to protect. So in this scenario where you restore a type of a reef, or any of the reefs that I've just shown you there, or any of the habitats, here again you have the wave energy. As it crosses here, you can see that the arrows, the length of the arrows are what you're looking at here. You have much reduced velocities after it has passed over here. So the drag created by this feature, by this habitat, is taking energy out of the wave. So you have much reduced energy here. Then if you again pass this over something like kelp or seagrass, it's much reduced again. And then rather than eroding the coast, the waves that move up into this shoreline area are actually moving sand landward at this stage. Even during a storm, this can happen. And so you get buildup of sediment along the coast, and then this acts as a natural barrier to coastal erosion and flooding. So compare this to this. So that's these are examples for a broader bay, a bigger system. And there are lots of examples around the world of for these types of solutions. The living coastlines on the east coast of the US, oysters and oyster reefs are a common one, and salt marshes. So there's a huge database there of evidence on that one, and case studies. The Pathfinder series that was done across Europe, there's lots of good examples in that. There was, in particular, there's a few of them in the UK with very, very similar contexts to Galway and Galway Bay. Before those two, there were a whole series of ICZM demonstration projects across Europe, and many of these have nature-based solutions as a component as well. New York City is a very good example where you think, oh, this is a seriously urban environment that you couldn't possibly have nature-based solutions. But they have a 1 billion oyster project going on at the moment, looking at restoring oyster beds right across the bay in front of New York as a coastal protection measure. And on the side then, they also are trying to restore as many of the wetlands so that the storm surges can leak off into those wetlands before it actually approaches the city. And of course, there's many examples in that document, the EU document. And I'm not sure if it was more a question mark, if Natural Capital Ireland have a database or are planning on putting together a resource as well. So maybe we could talk about that afterwards. In terms of dunes then, the standard way we have approached dunes, coastal dunes and beaches and cities are to build seawalls and put in groins. You'll see in this particular diagram here, there's no barrier here to storm waves reaching the coast. So you have these massive waves crashing right on the coast. Groins, they look like this. They prevent sand moving along the coast, or that's the idea. This is just an example from Salt Hill of some groins. So they prevent sand moving this direction. And then we should all know what seawalls look like. They prevent water moving across shore. So here's an example of one that's built between the sand dune and the beach. And here are just some other examples from around the world. Usually not particularly nice looking features. Although a lot of people in Salt Hill would give you an argument on that, they like walking on. So what are the problems with some of these? They change the hydrodynamics. So if you put in a seawall or a hard structure, it essentially moves the energy down the coast. And so you get increased erosion very close to the ends of these, on both ends of these types of structures. So you protect this area, but you increase the likelihood of erosion down the coast. So if you drew a straight line across here somewhere, you would have the original shoreline, and this is rapidly increased because of that protection. And then directly in front of it, and you see this right across Ireland in most of our coastal villages and towns where seawalls have been built, Lahinch is just one example. You have the wave energy coming in, crashing off the wall. It has to go somewhere, so it usually returns to sea during a storm along the seabed. And because there's so much energy there, it takes away the sand with it. And so you get a lowering of beaches in front of these seawalls and a loss of beaches at high tide. So when the tide comes in, your beach is actually gone. So you've completely lost your beach at high tide. And the comparison then between that and a nature-based solution, the first thing you can see without the seawall here and the engineered structures is that the whole size of a natural barrier is wider. And we call it a barrier because it's literally a barrier to energy and flooding from the sea. So that's the first thing we could say. And then the other thing is that the connection between the sand on the beach and the near shore and the coastal dunes, it's possible for sand to move between these and along shore. So these arrows are all indicating that you can have sand movement between them. So here's just one example from that. Here's a beach up in Derry on the north coast, a nice healthy wide beach, embryo dunes, big a dune system that has been there for maybe 100 years, and it all erodes in one storm over the winter. So you have about 4 meters vertical erosion, and then the beach itself is completely lowered. But in the following year, the following summer, a lot of this sand has just come back on shore. It's been offshore, has been moved back on shore. And so that connection between the beach, the near shore, and the dune is still there. So the nature-based solution is that these things can fix themselves if left over time. And just in terms of a diagram, how does that look? This is the part that's been eroded. It moves offshore, and then over time, it's moved back onto the beach. But it's this section here that is probably a problem in a lot of cases. This is the part where the dune actually reforms in the position that it was in. And look,
Kevin,
sorry,
Kevin.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. Sorry, can I just give you a 1 minute there, just on the time? Brilliant, thanks a million.
No problem.
Fantastic, brilliant, thank.
Okay, so this is the dune, and over time, it takes time for these plants to come back in place and to grow again. But while you're waiting for that to happen, you can lose your sand through the dune system. So that's it, moving back into the dune system. So although it has come back on shore, it's been lost. And in this case, it can also be lost back offshore again with another storm. And just to show this in context in Salt Hill, this is January 2015. So we had storms, removed all the sand. It came back, although this is March, it actually came back within 2 weeks, it was back. And here's another example there. And this is an example from 2017. What was that hurricane that passed through? So this is before the storm, and this is after the storm. So this sand here has simply moved to the bottom of the beach. This is only 50, 60 meters away, and then that moves back up over time. So in terms of nature-based solutions, what can we do? We can let nature do its thing. So that's the first example, and that's Grattan Beach. We can give nature a helping hand. So some planting and some fences and keeping people off from trampling. And we can also do more structural stuff using things like beach nourishment and more large scale things. And then once you move beyond that, you're not really helping nature very much. So whether it's a nature-based solution or not, it'd be hard to justify. And as Emer mentioned earlier on, ecosystem services, it's not just coastal protection. There are so many other things that you get from this. In terms of examples then, again, there are lots of examples from dunes, but I just wanted to mention that this isn't something new in Ireland. So these are examples of past guidebooks and practices from Ireland that we have that knowledge base already, so we're not trying to learn something new. In terms of Galway Bay, I was just mentioned before I started that particularly for Grattan Beach, we have an idea for a project, and I'm talking to the environment section about that. And just some final thoughts. My final thought here was one of the key things here is that doing this correctly is about engaging communities, and doing proper engagement is about having conversations. So it's not about consultations. It's not about coming up with a plan and then asking the community what they think about it. It's really about talking to communities and co-designing the future, co-designing solutions. So I've further thoughts on that on my blog, and you can go on there to see exactly you know, some of the ideas that I have about that if you get a chance. They're all quite short blogs. And lastly, just to say that the Maharees community is a really good example in County Kerry, where the whole community came together. The image there was 200 in that room. They have lots of people working over the last number of years on trying to save their dune system. And they have done something in the order of, there it is, 350 actions over the 3 years. But the problem with this is it's not sustainable. This is people doing volunteer work, and they need help doing that. So it's a combination of what the councils can do and what the communities can do, and coming together to actually try and come up with that co-designed future in consultate, not in engaging with each other to do that. So I'll leave it at that, and sorry for going a bit over time.
Thanks a million for Kevin for that. That was fantastic. And again, it was brilliant seeing the stark difference between the conventional coastal engineering compared to nature-based solutions there with the seawalls and what needs to be removed, and then looking at the dune systems as well. And you'd mentioned Maharees, so we have had Martha Farrell on from the Maharees, and anyone who hasn't seen the introductory talk or the Sligo talk, I'd highly recommend listening to that as well. So thanks a million for that, Kevin. I'm going to introduce Tig McIntyre now from Go Green Roots and Maynooth University. So Tig, welcome, and if you want to share your slides.
Sure.
Thanks, Emil.
Just bear with me. I'm trying to use complex technology here, so just be a moment. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay, hopefully you can see me now, can you?
Can indeed. Yep, perfect.
Look, it's my pleasure to contribute here today, and I think I probably add a different dimension, partly because of my background. So I'm an environmental psychologist at Maynooth University. So that's been the focus of my work, certainly for a number of years. Previously, I was a practitioner, psychologist in sport, physical activity and well-being. So essentially, I'm going to try focus on the human dimension, and I think it's really interesting. So a recent review suggested that although more than 50% of nature-based solutions projects have a goal or a target to enhance health and well-being, it's rarely measured, or at least rarely demonstrated in a clear and lucid way, which allows for the evidence base to grow. And I think the second point I'd mention is there's perhaps multiple modes of working with an NBS, and co-creation is very much part of it. And what we're focusing on is not just co-creation, but co-imagination. So we're very focused on trying to instill a shared conceptualization of the challenges, the processes, the solutions, and the sustainability. So hopefully this shall work. I'll just try to take it forward. Just one moment, sorry. Sorry, technology is winning at the moment. You're still able to see me on screen, are you?
No, you're back down to, you're stopped sharing your screen there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Cool, that's no problem. There, you're back. We can see, yeah, we can see you perfect.
Thanks.
Okay.
Great, thanks so much. So I'm going to try use some natural metaphors to talk about, the project that I'm part of the team on, which is Go Green Roots. It's an 11.14 European project funded by Horizon. To be fair, just to give it context, this is essentially more than 6 years work to get to the stage that we're lucky enough to be funded. I'm now at Maynooth University, and as I mentioned, the title I have now is environmental psychologist. And I have to say, environmental psychologist is an interesting title because it's not a discipline which is prominent within the field of psychology, which tells you something about psychology as a field has to play catch up. So when we look at that point I made earlier about MBS, it's perhaps one of the reasons why, I guess, people's connection to nature, people's understanding of MBS, and their psychological ownership of a green infrastructure as part of MBS has yet to be clearly elucidated. So that's a lovely tree from Maynooth University campus, some of you may know. As far as I know, that is the Silk and Thomas tree. That's just to give context to where I'm lucky enough to be at most of the time. If we look at the bigger picture, there's mega trends. So you can either look at the report of the UN on these trends, or you can look at successive WEF World Risks Report. These are some of the mega trends, and these are very much like at the foremost of our minds after being through the challenge of a global pandemic. So what's really interesting here is that some of these are very solvable, and some of these we have to question, did we really commit to doing much about them? And I can point out one thing here is that, we can ask a question, which has the greatest burden of disease? And that's often asked by people within different areas. And just for example, there's a lot of variability or I guess diversity even in one of these areas. So if you look at EPA recently highlighted that there's about 400,000 people die annually as a result of air pollution, and yet other estimates would be more than double that. So we have to question that there's different methods being applied. Mental illness is really interesting because in 2004, the WHO said that by 2030, depression alone would account for the greatest burden of disease, of non-communicable diseases typically. By 2017, they'd already come to that assertion. So some of these have accelerated far beyond what was predicted. The issue isn't a competition between the burdens, but actually to understand how they're linked. This is something, again, has emerged out of COVID lockdowns and obviously the challenge of COVID-19 global pandemic itself. So I think we now have a better appreciation these are interconnected. So just to reflect back on COVID, and let's hope this is a looking back and we're not in further lockdowns. One of the things we noticed, and there is emerging research, the reason not presenting all the nerdier research is because we're conducting a review ourselves on this. So there's work by Geisha Kinderman at Galway in the Irish context. There's surveys both north and south in the island showing that people did move to nature during lockdowns. People explore their own local nature. And this is a major shift in behavior. It also has implications perhaps for active travel in the future because people got to know their 2 and 5K much better than before. So as a psychologist, I'd say their mental maps are a bit more sophisticated than they were. Potentially some of these promote long-term habits because hand washing isn't the only habit that we're going to have in the future. I think it's likely that some of these occurred for more than 50 days, and that's probably long enough to form a good and reliable habit. One of the issues was the displacement of physical activity. With sport and gyms closed, typically people shifted their physical activity to green space and walking to the area rather than driving. So this is quite interesting because this has long-term implications for the provision of sport and physical activity and for Healthy Ireland campaigns, for example. So we're looking at this model of sustainable physical activity for the future. Just to give an example, last year during the pandemic, at the tail end of spring last year, we ran a campaign with different stakeholders. It was called Nature Moves. It was based on the idea that, you know, it's a low risk, positive impact intervention to get people to go to nature. And we had this notice active time in nature. So this acronym was actually behind different sequences or activities you engage in during the duration of the campaign. The basis for this is a little bit founded by our work with some of these different stakeholders, Mental Health Ireland, and other projects we have with Dhúill called Woodlands for Health. We did a review a couple of years ago. We certainly did the work on it a number of years ago, which showed that nature-based interventions, and that's different to solutions. So nature-based interventions are essentially applying nature as a setting for psychological recovery or stimulation. And that showed that there's a very low risk here, and you don't need to run a RCT on something when there's a low risk. What you need to do is to perhaps at most a controlled trial or more ecologically valid research. So this quasi-intervention did actually get a lot of traction on Twitter. It did become part of a national campaign for different bodies, and it gave us a hint that the views that people had towards nature were changing. And nature as a concept is quite complex. And I think that's something we're able to pick up from some of the subsequent research we've done on this. For example, at the moment, we actually have a survey across several European cities looking at people's needs for the future in their cities. How do they want to access nature? What types of nature would they like to see? And this fits in with the NBS principles around nature in their cities can have a huge impact on human health, not just on mitigating co-hazards of noise and air pollution, for example. So this takes us to, I guess, our specific project. Now it's really complex and I'm not going to take you through the layers of the cake, but I'll just hint that essentially we apply NBS and the nature-based solutions are decided on the basis of co-creation. So that means they're based on the challenges faced by the communities in the cities. And we have different dimensions of our project augment nature-based solutions. So they include nature-based enterprises, what we call GROW, FEEL, which is about sustainable physical activity, which has a really interesting point because it's not just about green space for movement, which has been the predominant focus for a number of decades, but actually green space for restoration, because some of the research we've done on during COVID lockdown suggests people were going to green space, not just for physical activity, but many were going there for solace, for tranquility, for psychological recovery. We also have a digital innovation component, which has some elements like virtual reality and digital nature. That's, looking at videos of nature on your phone. And we have a learning component, which includes engaged citizen science. And we think that's actually kind of central to activating citizens. And let me give an example. Engaged citizen science isn't what we might get from the typical paradigm of citizen science. Means you go to a website, you're told what to capture, and you go capture it, you upload your data, and you get commended as a good citizen. In engaged citizen science, which is a model largely based from the US in an EPA-funded study, was groundbreaking in this. And it shows that citizens can become not just data collectors, but engaged decision makers, providing they get to choose what the topic of the citizen science or the target is. And I think that allows communities to decide in their community whether they're looking at noise, air pollution, natural soundscape, particular aspects of biodiversity. So they get to choose. And that means they become part of a chain of decision making. And we think that's perhaps one innovative element within our project. So we work across 6 European cities. Now, this is not an atypical diagram. Like, most of you would know the principles behind this, increased tree canopy cover and optimal species choice. And if you look at a city, one of our target cities at Limerick, it's got quite a low, one of the lowest percentages of tree canopy cover of any city in Ireland. In fact, it also has essentially a barren desert in terms of green space. It's a major part of the city actually doesn't have parks, and the parks that are there have evolved and hopefully will be upgraded in terms of biodiversity in the future to offer more challenge. So there are essentially the use of connected green linear parks to promote biodiversity and provide green routes, which is obviously the name of the project. So that's essentially the principle behind it. But we have a different focus. So the primacy of most NBS projects has typically been to promote mitigation and adaptation. And in our project, our focus is not on the climate and species elements and biodiversity elements. The primary focus is on human health, in addition to other functions of NBS. And we look at this through a multidimensional model called 360 Health. So we're able to capture both through self-report and objective and other means, people's movement, where they're physically active. We're able to measure their sleep, quantity, quality, duration, etc. We're able to link that with sustainability, with their time in nature, with social community health and psychological resilience, which I'll come back to. So this is pretty radical. It's something we're still working on, but it will permeate all our project. So to be healthy won't be based on some of the narrower dimensions that we typically look at of citizens, which is either years lived with a disability or longevity. We'll try to look at health within a more holistic way, which should be able to connect sustainable practices and behaviors with positive aspects of psychological health. Just to go a step further, so ultimately we're concerned with promoting both human and environmental health. And I can just give you one example here. So really concerned with this idea of people's connection with nature. And this is something which is, being amplified during COVID times. We have several PhDs dedicated to this area, but one in particular, Maynooth, is concerned with what is urban nature. How do people perceive it? What are the aspects that are perceived positively? And this urban nature is being viewed as being distinctive to wilderness or some seascapes or more areas which are larger in scale. So urban nature, by definition, is typically going to, in practice, unfortunately, is often degraded, but by definition, often of small scale. And we're also looking at the ideas of using digital nature, both virtual reality and digital video and audio, which include things like soundscapes, simulations of being active in green or gray being built environments. We're using some participatory methodologies like soundscape walks, the walking methodology, Delphi studies. And all this is to really understand, how do we cultivate nature connectedness among citizens? How do we connect them to NBS? So they recognize, that's not just new green infrastructure, that's their tree, their park, their space. So it's connected to what we call digital placemaking. Just in terms of, if we're talking about Galway, I think there's something that was mentioned earlier in terms of resilience. We too focus on resilience, but we're not just concerned with ecosystem resilience, we're concerned with psychological resilience. So I've been part of a research team working on measuring and understanding this. What's really interesting is natural environments really have the capacity to promote psychological resilience. So in a green playground, you've got much more challenge, you've much more gradated challenge, and something I'll come back to in a moment about blue exercise. So you promote this mastery motive, not an ego motive that you might get from sport settings. And people get a lot of choice about what behaviors they do in natural spaces, whether it's sit under a tree, read a book, or whether it's a green playground and you can try balance on a log. There's obviously some other benefits from fields in which I'm not involved, but we have members of our project who are, to understand skin microbiome in terms of exposure to different species when you're under 8 years of age, for example. So there's multiple benefits from some of these possibilities.
Just to give you 2 minutes there. Brilliant.
Sure, yeah.
Thanks,
just to focus on something which is very, prescient for Galway. So Galway, as unique coastal situation, gives it access to blue space. And the understanding of blue space has really emerged from a European project called Blue Health and a project called SOPHY, which has Easky Britain, an NUI Galway researcher on it. And there's some other sources here, including our book from 2019 on this. Now, what's interesting here is this is where we can connect activity with policy. So our government has recently given, okay, it's a small amount, but it's significant nevertheless, 19 million to develop, infrastructure to support water-based recreation in our blue spaces over the next number of years. And that's kind of interesting because they are following the evidence. The evidence suggests that blue space is very valuable to communities. And this can change our attitudes towards sustainability. So I'm just going to finish up with this slide to explain some of the big picture stuff. So COVID-19 opens a window into possibly a carbon neutral future. Certainly did for a time. Psychological resilience, equality, nature, and health. These are on habit formation, these potential habit of going to nature. These are all new possibilities for the future of urban citizens. All the problems I mentioned, talked about the mega trends. So these trends are actually all connected by UN SDGs. And I think if there's one learning we can take perhaps from here is that we need to use and map out our activities on the basis of sustainable development goals. In particular to our project, 11.7 is a target for sustainable communities and cities, and that focuses on providing equitable access to high quality green space. And what that usually means is, about 2 hectares within a 5 minutes walk of where you live. And that's something we can all work towards using nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Thanks a million for that, Tig. That was really interesting, really fascinating stuff. And again, highlighting how it's important to promote human and environmental health, and getting kind of citizen science engagement is hugely, this is just a message that's coming across in all of our talks, which is fantastic. What I'm going to do now is we were going to do a quick discussion, but what we might do is if we move on to the implementation plan, then we can follow that on with our discussion, if that's okay with everyone, just in terms of time that we have left. So what I'm going to briefly introduce you to and just talk about is the implementation plan. And our plan is to do a rapid design exercise. And we have our speakers as well here with us as well. So if there's any questions from their talks or any questions in relation to ideas that you have for nature-based solutions. So just in terms of the National Adaptation Framework, they state that adaptation actions must be prioritised according to relevant criteria, such as efficiency, cost effectiveness, risk and urgency, and ensuring a just transition. So part of the challenge here is how do you prioritise investment in certain adaptation actions over others, and that is quite a challenge. Your climate adaptation strategy highlights focusing on recognising and addressing the long-term and uncertain nature of climate change, also that it's based on acceptable and unacceptable levels of risk, and really importantly that it avoids maladaptation and incorporates no regrets actions. So with any implementation process, it is a dynamic process and a learning process. So just in terms of how to implement nature-based solutions for your goals, there's loads of questions like planning, what are the risks, who do you collaborate with? And as has come across in all of our talks, again, collaboration and engagement with the community is hugely important. Training as well is really important, and upskilling, and that's both internally and in the community. The expected outcomes, who are the community stakeholders, who do you engage with within the community, and how do you engage? Where does the money come from? So funding is always a huge challenge. What the cost of implementing a solution, nature-based solutions are. Are you going to need volunteers to help with certain implementations, which we have seen with a lot of the community groups get amazing work done with volunteers? What are the best practice models out there, both globally and internationally, and nationally? And what are the results-based projects? So we've seen examples throughout all of our talks and in our previous talks of different results-based methods. Also, is there realistic time frame, planning out a time frame for implementing nature-based solutions, carrying out pilot projects? So Kevin had mentioned the Maharees there, and then the work he on Bratton Beach as well, he was talking about. So again, pilot projects are hugely important. What are the barriers to implementing nature-based solutions? And this all comes under the engagement stage as well, and kind of listening to concerns. The importance of schools as well within the community and how they can help with these goals of implementing nature-based solutions, and also businesses as well. And one of the things that did come up in previous talks was ownership being an issue. So who owns the actual land? And that can be quite an issue along the coastal areas as well, where there could be golf courses, private ownership, and then local authority ownership. So we're going to quickly go to our implementation plan. So this, never mind, there's a lot of text looking in this document, but basically we're after sending the implementation plan document to everyone that's attending today. So you can have that open on your screen. And basically the main column is the column here on the left-hand side. So the first column there, the first part of the implementation plan is the engagement phase. So it's identifying your risk area and considering a pilot project. And the middle column is ancillary information that you may need to look at when you've kind of identified what the nature-based solution you're going to consider. And then we have a timeline on the far right-hand corner. So the next part of the implementation plan is a planning part. That's where you're actually going and looking at real-life projects that have already been implemented and engaging there with the stakeholders. The adaptation itself, it's coming up with where is the finance coming from, so who's actually going to carry out the nature-based solution, and how you're going to kind of develop the project. And also part of that implementation is carrying out a pilot project, and through all of this there is going to be community engagement and having the community on board and a good buy-in. So we are going to do some breakout rooms now. And what we're going to do, I think we'll do, Orla, are we going to go with 2 breakout rooms?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, perfect. So we're going to call out Orla's going to call out one of the names from each of the breakout rooms, and they can pick a subject that they'd like to look at in terms of a nature-based solution that could be implemented. So it could be coastal erosion, flooding, peatlands, wetlands, biodiversity, infrastructure, water sources, and then following on from Tig's talk as well, it could be in relation to the green spaces as well, or any issue that you think it would work well with. So Orla will call out the names there. If you want to call out someone from breakout room 1, Orla, they can pick what they want to.
Yeah, sure. So maybe Paul Batty, from the topics that you see on screen or any others, is there anything, there's no right or wrong answers, but is there anything that you think that group 1 should focus on?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think coastal erosion.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And for group 2, just let me check. Maybe David Skeen, do you have a topic that you'd like to focus on? We can't hear you, David, if you're trying to speak. I see you're off mute, but okay, we might we might ask Francis McAvoy then.
Yes, flooding, I think.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks, Francis. Okay, so I'm just going to open up these rooms.
Yeah, and so in each room, if you decide who the person is that's going to report back, and it's really a discussion and chat about the implementation plan document that you have. Key questions to consider is which department or theme would be involved in the nature-based solution implementation, who would be involved at each step, who would implement it. So would it be the local authority or the community stakeholders or a private consultancy? What training or upskilling would be required, and how would it be funded? And are the timescales we've set realistic? So Orla, if you want to fire ahead and invite all the breakout rooms.
Yep, go ahead.
So yeah, you just click to join your relevant breakout room. And for any of the speakers, you can go between the two rooms as well if you want.
Great, I think that's everybody.
All right. Oh, great. I was going to say, can you put Kevin in room 1, the coastal erosion?
Okay.
He might want to pop in there. Move
to room 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
As they said, yeah, they do coastal erosion.
Okay.
Cool. And we can, I've put up 15 minutes. We should actually still be okay.
Yeah, no. We should be fine.
I was probably talking really fast for that, that last bit.
No, actually, it honestly didn't come off that way.
Okay.
I'm just making a note of, so breakout room 1 said coastal erosion, didn't they?
Yeah, and breakout rooms 2 said flooding.
Wonder, that's been the 2 topics that they've all really picked.
Even in the strategies, that is the main 2. That's like coastal erosion and flooding.
Okay, yeah. I wonder then, maybe is biodiversity just a secondary benefit of nature-based solutions?
Yeah.
Or that's how they see it? I don't know, because it doesn't seem like they'll want to put in a nature-based solution for biodiversity, but I suppose it's like these are nature-based solutions for climate adaptation mostly.
Yeah, but then I guess the message that, say, with the biodiversity is part of the nature-based solution. So even if you're protecting the coastal habitats, that is protecting the biodiversity. I thought there would have been maybe something to do with green infrastructure here for, or the walking corridors or for Galway City. But yeah, no, it's interesting. But I suppose all these like the whole of Ireland, actually flooding is our problem.
Yeah. I was looking.
Yeah, I was going to say what I might do is, I don't know what way we are when they get back, is I might just say that we're going to send the survey to them.
Okay.
To fill out, so that I'll send it to Sharon, and if they don't mind filling that out, that means then they can do it afterwards, and it gives us right up till whatever time, because what time are we now? 37. So it'll be 50 by the time they get back, and that gives us like 5 minutes for each of them, and then thank yous to everyone.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
is
if
there
I was
anything
doing
else?
this, I was going to say, if I was doing this again, I'd go with 2, like the speakers are all amazing, but 2 speakers for 20 minutes each, probably. I think people need a bit of extra time. I think, what do you think?
To explain their work, or?
Well, no, just as in, because everyone goes over.
Yeah, yeah, maybe it's, and I probably need to think about that for the data for nature thing. Well, certainly, yeah, I don't know. No, I think I've really enjoyed, the speakers have been brilliant,
Yeah,
like for these workshops. And today is the only day that it's been really that people have gone significantly over, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
So
yeah, I suppose it's maybe, because I do have to say it's been a great depth of different knowledge, kind of has been great having all the 15 speakers.
And the fact that there's 3 different examples for the audience, not
yeah.
just kind of two going really really in depth.
Yeah.
So no, I've really like that. The only thing is that it did, I suppose it did eat into their ability to ask questions and talk themselves and stuff like that. Yeah, so
exactly. Yes, that's the only thing. But yeah, or else because it's just I've tried to shorten my stuff, but I just find because we are supposed to be talking about their actions, so I'm only skipping over them anyway as it is. So, but I still need kind of what's there. So yeah. But, yeah, no, yeah. Well, in fairness, now we haven't been too bad on time. Like maybe just going 5-10 minutes over the whole thing. So
yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's something to reflect on in the if we do manage to roll this out to other local authorities.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I think they've gone really well. I think it's a brilliant package.
Yeah. No, it is. It's been great actually. And the speakers have been so great, and we've had nobody saying no, that kind of way, which is great.
Well, they seem glad that it's happening as well.
But
that's what I was, Anissa was saying that she'd have a chat with you about Data for Nature. I think it's just like, you can tell that you've a lot of experience planning workshops, and like the way you've been, I know you were saying it takes a lot of time to call the speakers, but that's really important then, like following up and thanking them after and all that, like just that we have that list for the Data for Nature one, that we know we have to get through all of this. Like, is that what you do, or do you have a checklist for workshops?
No, not really. Sorry, 1 second, Orla. God, there's someone banging at my door here. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, no, go for it.
Sorry, Orla. My God, delivery people never, like, they knock and just leave. Well, just thank God when Kevin had just come on, I thought your mum was about to break my door down. He was like banging.
God,
and so I had to quickly pause the thing. Now he was already speaking, thank God.
Yeah.
And I was just like, your man, give me. I say you thought I was deaf because I was like,
I had that as well, and I felt like such a, like I ran not today, but maybe on one of the other workshops, and I was just like, and you feel like such a kind of I don't know, just like a knob, like such a businesswoman.
I know, exactly. Like, I'm busy.
Yeah, too busy to answer the door.
To answer my door. But I suppose with my I suppose I do have a kind of a checklist like that, getting in touch beforehand, and then making sure obviously everyone has their links and knows what's going on, and then the kind of run through, and then the thanks. I always would send the thank yous afterwards anyway, the second they've nearly finished, because yourself trying to do it later on is a pain. So so, and just the time, like setting out the timing, I do that, like, just so I know we haven't really followed our timings properly, but when you have it sort of set out there, the timeline or the outline of your thing, at least you know that at 3:30 or at whatever, at 3 o'clock, I'm supposed to be at this point. And if I'm not, I need to move it on. So
I think we'll do there'll be someone dedicated on time for the Data for Nature one. Because there are so many speakers in, and it's an hour and a half each slot. So
oh right, wow. Oh yeah, sure, I'm signed up for it. If you need me to do anything, I'll be at it anyway, so just let me know. So
okay, great, thanks.
So that's good. Are you looking forward to it? Because you're finished on Friday though, aren't you? Or is it this Friday you finished?
I kind of have to do the Data for Nature, but so like mostly finished on Friday. But I don't know if I'm looking forward to it. I hope it'll go okay. I think just I think I just need to do a little bit more work on it and kind of iron out the final bits to feel like we know how things will go. I think it was kind of nice maybe for this that you had been able to see a lot of the speakers first, so you know what they'll be like. And I'm a bit worried that some of them will go over, or not be that exciting, or
I know it's really hard if you haven't seen someone before.
Yeah.
which I hadn't seen everyone, but I've been happy with everyone that's
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been great. But yeah, it is always the stress. But yeah, hoping everyone's happy.
It's mad, like event management is such a part of a lot of jobs now, and like nobody gets any training in it, or it seems
I
like no one gets
know,
any
you're
training. You
just
just have to
thrown into it.
yeah, you just have to kind of observe what you like in other events and then try and replicate that.
Exactly. So yeah, sink or swim.
Yeah, I think that'll be nice in KPMG. I assume like I won't have to do any do any of that, and they'll have like a proper events person, so it'd be nice to just focus on the content, or like what are the actions out of an event rather than like the sign-ups and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that'll be great. God. And so what is your job title? Like, what is it that you're...
It's Associate Director of their Sustainable Futures team, which means, it's like business consulting. But they work with, I was actually looking up that Belfast example that Caroline Creamer gave, because they've worked with Belfast City Council as well. So they do some kind of public, they said they had something with Limerick City Council as well.
Brilliant.
So it'll be like climate action plans for them. And, so I think it's just... But then there'll also be big ones like ESB and Glanbia, like big corporates and stuff. So
brilliant.
Yeah, I'd say it'll be very varied.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to
very
it.
different. Yeah.
It will be really different. Yeah. But
yeah,
so it'll take a bit of an adjustment period, I think. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Still good.
When does your Killarney work kick off?
Well, it's kind of now, like it's I've to set up all the field work for May, and for this summer we'll do organize our field work. So the guy I'm working with, we're having a meeting, a walking meeting on
cool.
on what he's going to drive out. We'll go for a walk here and out in Swords, whatever, and just to figure out our fieldwork blocks basically. So
and it's just two on the project, is it?
Yeah, well, it's us two, and then I asked Beck to come in to run the project, because they have all the equipment, all the GPS and mapping stuff and all that stuff. So
okay.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't have the equipment to take on. I'd be stressed to bits if you were taking on the whole project. So I worked with them before, and they're absolutely fantastic. So I do my ecology stuff and my reports, and they get everything else sorted. So
okay. And Beck, is that an acronym?
So they're biological environmental conservation consultants.
Okay.
So they started out years ago in Trinity. They used to be, I think some of the original starters were doing PhDs in Trinity, and something came up and a project they decided to go for, and that's when they started Beck. So
okay. Cool.
Yeah, Deirdre Lynn was one of them, actually,
was
one of the starters of Beck. Yeah.
Oh no way! Right.
Yeah, her and Amy Kingston. Yeah.
Right. Cool.
So so then she had to obviously give it up.
Yeah. God, that's cool.
Yeah. No,
done a lot of on the ground work. Yeah.
Yeah. She's amazing. Yeah. God. Do we need? It was about 46. Will we give them a broadcast? How long have they been in the rooms?
I think they've only been in 10 minutes.
Okay.
So.
Cool. Yeah, that's perfect.
I can broadcast a message and say five minutes left.
Yeah, actually, just to what time are we? I'm at 47. There's me at 47. 3 minutes left, maybe.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's
my
fine.
watch.
We'll call you back. Okay, Grant. Gosh, yeah, I like the breakout rooms. I think they're really, or like the way they're done here. It's good. It's a nice setup.
Yeah. Oh no, definitely, they're great. Kind of get the conversation going. So yeah. So I think what we had, the 10 people in the end. I think that included Sharon.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just.
The 7 of us. I don't know if everyone's still here.
We had. Let's see, hold on. Oh, something wrong with me. So 6 and then 8. So we had 11.
All right, cool.
Good. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if Lisa Smith and Connor Kelly, I don't have any details about them, and they might be then Mayo.
I'm not, no, I think she just didn't have details. There's a couple of people she didn't have details for.
Okay.
So yeah, I didn't have everyone anyway. So yeah, so breakout rooms. I get my notes ready. God, I'll be saying this in my sleep after the afternoon.
Yeah, yeah,
afternoon
Jesus.
one.
Yeah. Yeah, the only other thing I was wondering, maybe it's not, it was like, well, I think I've taken good notes for the report. But yeah, I was like, oh, should we take a little, hands up, everyone saying hi, to if we're doing like a real kind of action focused report, that it's like, oh, we held all these workshops, and just like a screenshot of people on a Zoom call on the workshops.
Yeah.
There might be a kind of data
GDPR thing.
Yeah,
so and some
maybe
people I think would hate that. It's like if you've and your face is frozen with your eyes half.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, it would be good seeing the. Well, we could ask.
I could do a screenshot of you at the very beginning of Galway County. So as in, it'll just say, it'll have mostly the slide saying Natural Capital Ireland.
Yeah.
We can have your image or not if you don't want. But, just that holding slide to kind of show them.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, no, I don't mind that. Yeah, as long as I'm not making one of the weird faces. Yeah. But yeah, no, that sounds good, because it is. Yeah, I was trying to think as well, because if they want an action pack as such, like how do we do this? Well, we obviously need to fit in the report as well and what came up, and as in the normal report part, and then just a section would be the implementation, how to implement kind of thing.
Yeah. I think if we have this chat on Thursday where we'll talk about the headings, we should be able to get it down.
Yeah. They should
Will
be coming back now. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll close the rooms, and that gives them 60 seconds now.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
So Emer and CARO. All right, cool, perfect. Yeah. So breakout room 1, coastal erosion. It's mad, that has been for everybody. It's been basically coastal erosion and flooding, isn't it?
Yeah. I suppose it's just, I mean, obviously it would be different if for the Midlands, but that would be interesting then, because there's the Dublin CARO, and then I think there's 5 CAROs, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it is.
So there's a Midlands one, and that'd be quite different. I think it'd be really interesting.
So it would be very interesting to see. Like flooding would still be a massive issue there, obviously. And then agriculture, I'd say, and the peatland and the bogs is big time. Yeah, actually, we have Matt Saunders on this afternoon for the bogs.
Okay, great.
Okay, welcome back, everybody.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
Yeah, that's great. So I think, do we have everyone back?
I think so. Let me just check.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so who is the breakout room 1 spokesperson on coastal erosion?
I think I got volunteered at the death there. We were getting kicked out of the breakout room. I don't know if I'm best placed to be the volunteer to speak about it. We spent a lot of the time speaking about the different issues of coastal erosion rather than answering the specific questions we were asked.
But that's totally fine. That's kind of, it's really getting the discussion going and thinking about, nature-based solutions. So how'd you get on?
So I suppose in terms, obviously, Galway's location, I suppose coastal erosion is a significant issue, and I suppose a lot of in discussing the issues of coastal erosion, what became apparent, a lot of the issues we have are with engineered solutions that are in place, and I suppose are being reinstated along the golf course out at Silver Strand. Possible impacts those engineered measures are having to the dynamics of the area, or not possible, obvious impacts that they're having to the dynamics of the area. Kevin Lynch there was explaining in terms of out at Silver Strand issues in relation to the erosion of the cliffs and how the dynamics of what's happening there, and that's impacting coastal erosion. But I suppose what we kind of concluded was that it's the solutions to these are it's very much a long-term program. There's no, I suppose, position where you can go in and correct these overnight. So maybe creating a project such as Grattan Beach that you can, I suppose, we talked about engaging and rather than consultation. Kevin mentioned in his conversation earlier about engaging and including the community as part of the design, and providing a project like that would demonstrate the benefits of a more nature-based solution, and then I suppose using that as a template to I suppose grow and carry out nature-based solutions in other locations. So we only really, I suppose, answered questions. I suppose obviously it's related to beach, which department would be rec amenity and environment would be involved, and in terms of timeline, while Grattan Beach might be a short timeline, it very much is a long timeline program.
Yeah, that's great. And like that with the Grattan Beach project then could be like a template as well for other beach areas. And I know everything, each area, it has its own specific issues, but again, it's kind of getting pilot projects going. And the point of these workshops as well is that there's this link up between all these different people, like between all the speakers we've had, and then between yourselves within the local authority as well. So that's really good. To hear back what you guys were talking about, and hopefully we'll be hearing about the Grattan Beach project in some time. And so who is in, or the speaker for room 2 for flooding?
So I might start off and then I'll pass over to Francis to add on any extra bits that I may have passed over. So we were talking about coastal flooding, and we decided to look at the Salt Hill area, which has high tides and high surge and high winds. When those kind of three things collide, there's a lot of flooding, overtopping of rock armor, and the floods affect the roads, car park, and can affect property as well. So in terms of kind of who would be involved in looking at MBS for this area, we were talking about the environment section and the transport section of the local authority, emergency services, and then in terms of community groups, the Salt Hill Village Business Association and Salt Hill residents groups, local councillors, and Tyke suggested as well that kind of clubs and societies that have access to that area as well would be good to include. And that kind of including these groups at the beginning, putting a lot of resources up front into the community will kind of help with the long-termism of the projects, and that can be done through lots of different ways in terms of delivering information through schools, doing it digitally, and then in terms of planning, in terms of who would take the lead, we thought as well the environment and the transport sector, but also that it's probably an intersectional approach that's needed. And that isn't maybe something that's done very often, except in terms of emergencies. And so we were talking about kind of new trainings that maybe should be introduced there, or the development of new systems. Tyke suggested silo busting workshops, which I thought was a great idea, and knowledge sharing between the different local authorities. So there may already be local authorities that are silo busting and could share that knowledge, and that there will be a role for regional authorities here. In terms of barriers to implementation, obviously we have the fact that it's a heritage city, so planning can be difficult, but also it was pointed out that nature-based solutions can even run into problems with, for instance, the Habitat Directive, and would require a lot of liaison with NPWS. And then Sharon was suggesting that, from one of the other workshops, they have been talking about how developing a fast track for MBS within the NACs would be a really great approach. And then in terms of funding, Tyke was suggesting, to kind of think outside the box. So community funding, crowdsource funding, collaboration with local FDI, and then looking kind of for broader funding opportunities. So for instance, he was saying about the Active Cities Fund. So if there's a health implication to your MBS, you know, you can kind of look somewhere like that. And then obviously there's different European funds available as well. So I might ask then if anybody else from the group would like to add anything to that. Francis, did I leave anything out?
You covered loads there, Isolt. The silo busting, Tig, tell us about it.
Yeah, we actually, in our project, it's the slide I didn't show, we have a learning ecosystem which comprises something called the Academy Cluster. So it's a cross-cutting unit within the project, irrespective of the structure of work packages. It was very formal in terms of organization processes. And in that, we have early career researchers, early career innovators from SMEs, and members of the teams of the municipalities. So they share, present ideas, engage in discourse. So, and it's very, very much led by the participants. So they decide who talks. They ask different presenters from, for example, green infrastructure, green wall manufacturers, and different partners to present. And then we do competency mapping to show how, you know, people are gaining strengths by working on the project. So we have, you know, we have people participating in that. Some of them are PhDs, some are mayors of the city who are there to learn and gain a bit more knowledge around MBS, and others are municipality staff, and then there's entrepreneurs as well. So the idea is, you know, in reality, this area is so complex, no one, even partner organization would have full understanding of all the implications or be concerned about them in the same way in terms of measurement or evaluations we might be. So by creating this a big focal point based around a shared learning environment, we foresee that this helps break down these barriers. And specifically, there are silo busting workshops which are run by one of our partners to help address some of these, you know, natural divisions that can occur. And where we've already had really good traction, it's where not just that you have a specific PM or project manager appointed from a city, if the NBS is large enough scale, but that their focus is on the cross-cutting nature of the issues. For example, in Versailles, in France, they have 7 departments which are connected to our project, and that, you know, they have 2 or 3 people per department, so that tells you a little bit about their commitment. Similarly, Limerick have done really well in trying to address the need for this to be cross-cutting. And I think that this aligns with clearly with the, you know, the type of innovation which is occurring in local authorities. I mean, they are having to adapt really quickly to changed pressures and drivers for change. So I think they're responding really well. And I have to say, I'm you know, my hat goes off to them because they have huge expertise, and part of our role in the project is ensuring that that is applied in a coherent way with other partners.
Cool. Thanks a million. That's a really good explanation as well of that. Does anyone else have any questions at all for our speakers, or just in general in relation to nature-based solutions? So, well, if you do, you can email them to anyone, any other questions you may have. You can email to Sharon Cosgrove and she can forward them on to us. I just want to take this opportunity to thank our speakers today. So Caroline Creamer, Kevin Lynch and Tig McIntyre, your talks are really inspiring, really fascinating. And I do hope that everyone from the local authority as well has gained something from them. Also, just to let everyone know that we have recorded this workshop and all the other workshops. So do have have a look at the different speakers as well that we've done for the different local authorities. And just before we finish up, we're going to send a link